Hi colleagues, today I have an opportunity to explore some of the foundational understandings that we need to engage with if we are to effectively design and implement strengths-based programs of Queensland HPE. In this presentation, I want to focus on addressing 4 key questions. Why is it important for us to understand and adopt a strengths-based approach? What is and is not a strengths-based approach? What informs this approach? How do we implement programs of HPE that adopt a strengths-based approach? And finally, what are the challenges and most importantly, the dangers of a strengths-based approach for Queensland HPE? In answering the first question of why, we need to recognise that the current reform of the Queensland Senior Health and Physical Education courses of study will drive a need for all of us to have an in-depth understanding of the ACHPER shape propositions. This is because the QCAA has been committed to ensuring that there is alignment between the 2 phases of learning and that the senior programs can build and draw upon the foundational work that has been done in primary and junior secondary courses. Secondly, the most recent statistics and surveys providing an insight into young Australians' health and well-being, whilst identifying some critical issues, overwhelmingly suggests that many young Australians are experiencing and perceive their lives as being enjoyable, active and healthy. Positive feedback during the ACHPER reform about the strengths-based approach more than likely reflects young people's and stakeholders' interests in having a HPE curriculum that has just as much to say about living a healthy life and a pleasurable life as it is about inoculating young Australians against ill health and risks of society. Additionally, many of us working with young people and/or conducting research on young people's thoughts regarding HPE have found that health messages and the like know that the plethora of don't messages and the deficit model of young people's lives they reflect inspire a typical roll your eyes apathy, scepticism, disbelief or flat out resistance from our young students. In fact, being unhealthy can in fact become rather cool. The third reason why strengths-based approach is so important, and in particular for us understanding it, is that we need to be developing a sophisticated understanding of our HPE curriculum, as there are so many organisations and individuals who would like to replace our work in school settings. While it is important to acknowledge that the outsourcing of HPE can and has resulted in a wide range of programs and welcome resources, the profession should remain vigilant to the proliferation of market-based partnerships and the relations between the public and the private that are playing out in their schools. And in this way, we need to understand and have a sophisticated lens of those programs that are or are not aligned with our HPE. So, intuitively, many of us have warmed to the notion of a strengths-based approach. However, concerns have been raised in relation to 2 key questions. What is a strengths-based approach exactly? And how can it be translated into the HPE classroom, gym, or onto the oval? So, to explore the answers to these questions, we need to really understand and get a sophisticated connection with the theory of strengths-based approaches. In response to the first question, it is important to note that strengths-based approaches are by no means new. Since the 1950s, psychologists have been building the field of positive psychology, which has provided a response to the questions of whether psychology had restricted itself and been reduced to the study of a darker, meaner, more negative person. Here, you can think of flow theory, positive youth development, and their influence particularly on youth sport and coaching, which will be a significant issue for senior PE. Globally, Indigenous health and education researchers have sought to adopt a strengths-based approach to the people and communities with which they work. And finally, many of us are familiar with the ethos of special ed, which endeavours at all times to focus on and work with ability rather than disability. All of these positive approaches, or strengths-based approaches, have involved a fundamental critique of a dominant emphasis on human deficits, societal risks, illnesses, and negative individual risk behaviours in trying to conceptualise both healthy and human living. However, today it is about the salutogenic theory that I want to now turn to, so that we can have a deeper understanding of strengths-based approaches as they've been perceived in Australia. Salutogenic theory was devised by a guy by the name of Aaron Antonovsky, an American researcher and in fact an epidemiologist. Aaron Antonovsky's early work explored chronic illness in the American population. At the conclusion of his studies, Aaron at the time was actually intrigued by the fact that there was so much illness and chronic illness in the population. The miracle was not that anybody was actually ill. What was the miracle of life was that anybody was actually ever healthy. He really wanted to know two questions. How have people managed to become healthy? And what was it that caused their health? In proposing this, Antonovsky searched for a word or a term that could be useful in capturing this theory or this approach. And so he borrowed the Latin word salus, which equals health, and the Greek word genesis, which means origin, and hence the phrase salutogenesis. As a result of this work, Antonovsky questioned the health sector's privileging of the pathogenic model of health. He identified some key characteristics of this. First, health is positioned as an absolute, a total perfect objective that can be obtained. In so, health is compromised by biophysical and psychosocial pathogens that health people and individuals have to address in order to fix the individual and achieve perfect health. From this perspective, health and education work is conducted according to pathogenic perspective and emphasises defects, repairing and or preventing a defect. At the core of the pathogenic paradigm, in theory and in action, is a dichotomous classification of people as being either diseased or healthy. By necessity, it is fundamentally a deficit model. In contrast, Antonovsky argued that everyone is in some ways always healthy. Rather than considering health as an absolute pure goal, Antonovsky's salutogenic model extends the definition of health offered by the World Health Organization, which employs a multidimensional health-illness continuum between two poles that are useful only as explanatory devices, are never found in reality, and these two poles are absolute health and absolute illness. Health is therefore seen as a continuous problem-solving process throughout life as we move across this continuum. Health isn't an outcome. This resource-based problem-solving model involves a shift from a one-sided focus on disease and risk factors to the factors and resources that develop people's health, without, of course, and this is important, excluding the significance of disease, illness or risks. Ensuring that we live our lives closer to the ease pole rather than the dis-ease pole, this depends on our ability to gain, use and reuse resources in a health-promoting way. The salutogenic concept of health, then, is in line with the Central World Health Organization's documents and can be widened beyond being simply an individual concept to one that encapsulates the socio-cultural, where health is developed as a relation between the individual and their surroundings. To explain this, Antonovsky, in a WHO seminar of 1992, provided an adaptation of the traditional health promotion metaphor of a river to clarify the vision of a salutogenic model. Here, Antonovsky critiques the dualist thinking within health research and practice and points to the whole idea of curative medicine's preoccupation with saving swimmers from the river and preventive medicine's concern with preventing people from falling in or being pushed into the river upstream. From a salutogenic perspective, Antonovsky argued that nobody is actually ever on the shore. We are all always in the dangerous river of life. The twin questions we must face is how dangerous is our river and how well can we swim? As a strengths-based model of health, the salutogenic perspective challenges us and asks us, what resources can I recognise, build and employ to live well and cope with the multitude of stresses that emerge in the river of life, instead of what do I simply need to do to fix to become healthy. So importantly, from a salutogenic perspective, health should always be attended to as a dynamic, ever-present relationship between the swimmer and the skills that the swimmer has to swim and the water, the river that surrounds our society. This focus on the relationship between the swimmer and the river is one of the major points of difference in the strengths-based model. So now we can turn to question 2. How does this all translate into a strengths-based approach into the Australian HPE classrooms? In many regards, the notion of strengths-based approach implies that the proposed HPE program will move beyond an emphasis on fixed approaches, which typically privilege health promotion language, focus on specific short-term interventions that produce visible changes in pupils' behaviour. Instead, we want this to be more in keeping with the notion of HPE as being an educative endeavour. From our preliminary work using this model, we have been able to identify some key orienting tasks or strategies that we need to do to adopt a health promoting approach. We believe these are asking different questions, and we've provided a table of these questions for you. We need to know and understand the strengths of young people and, most importantly, the communities in which they live their lives. We need to start with a broader overview or a mapping of the topic, rather than simply going in and focusing on risks. And finally, we need to engage students in problem-solving activities so that through this process they can be developing the resources that support them when they move beyond the school gates. So from a curriculum perspective, when we employ a salutogenic model, we're actually trying to find a whole range of ways in which we can give students access to skills, knowledges and principles, and to engage them in an inquiry pathway to explore these. Instead of simply getting students to identify their vulnerability in terms of particular health issues and diseases, or the risks associated with these, and the strategies that they should adopt to address those risks, a strengths-based approach motivates teachers and their students then to explore the breadth of life experiences and resources that support, inspire and promote young people's healthy living. And our subject area is full of fantastic knowledge and skills that students can study to build their own resource backpack. Health literacy is probably the easiest one to see in this picture, but sleep, positive relationships, the cultural celebrations of food, and most importantly, the potential posed by young people's engagement with technology can all be explored and investigated from a strengths-based perspective. Physical education is not beyond this either. Learning in, through and about physical activity, for example, can shift the dynamic away from merely getting kids to do physical activities and physical performances to address their risk of chronic disease or obesity, to a situation where HPE can provide resources for young people to live well. It would be great, wouldn't it, if PE teachers started with the assets, interests and possibilities of young people and their community to develop a love, engagement and development of physicality, physical literacies and physical cultures. Perhaps we just need to get those skateboards in the skateboard park pumping. However, if we consider strengths-based approaches from a resource building perspective or a salutogenic perspective, we can see that in fact teaching HPE and from a strengths-based approach is just as much about pedagogy as it is about curriculum. In fact, if not more. Instead of seeing young people as being in need of filling up with teachers' knowledge and skills to fix them, as we have for a long time advocated in our field, the real opportunity in HPE is about providing challenges that require students to draw on the resources, strengths and assets that they have access to problem solve and devise solutions that are relevant to themselves, their peers and the people and the communities within which they live. Our field is rich with pedagogical approaches that have been specifically designed to develop our students' problem-solving capacities and the authentic real-world knowledge and skills and attitudes that they can develop. For example, we can think of sport education model, We can think of TGFU, and we can go to the Mostyn spectrum for a whole range of pedagogies that can build young people's resources for healthy living. Critical inquiry is, of course, one of the most important approaches within this context, and a fundamental key to us challenging the individualisation that is sometimes associated with HPE. Without this proposition, we don't really have a chance at looking at the river. We don't have a chance to get young people to look at their rivers of life and the relationships between them and their society, the opportunities that are posed by society, by their communities, and the strengths and resources they can draw on, and the dangers that might be in their river of life. And so we conclude now with some challenges and some dangers. Like a Rubik's Cube, the propositions provide a unique and interactive, mutually supportive framework that need to be put together and to work together. The most crucial and overriding proposition, however, is that of delivering an educative HPE. This Australian curriculum proposition flags the importance of building a range of resources for young people, rather than simply ticking off a list of risks and fixing unhealthy behaviours. And without an educative intent, a strengths-based approach actually doesn't make sense. An example might be to think differently about how we love and care for a pet. This might not normally get included into a sexual health unit in the early years, but this would be a terrific way of taking young people on a journey to exploring and understanding the resources and the relationships that are positive in their life and in their family. And the educative intent also flags one of the biggest dangers that we have when we work with a strengths-based approach. A strengths-based orientation could be read according to a deficit risk of model quite easily. It could be done through an exclusive emphasis on the different resources that reduce the risk of being ill in the future. If we were to take this approach to a strengths-based approach, HPE programs would emphasise the teaching of health risks and healthy habits. It would also establish the strengths the students have or don't have, and accordingly try to identify students' deficits and how teachers could actually build those particular resources, knowledges or skills that are lacking. With this approach, students' learning would focus on how to recognise and avoid unhealthy behaviours like inactivity, unhealthy food, unsafe sex, misuse of drugs and lifestyle factors that raise the risk for illness and premature death. Students would also learn what assets and resources make people strong enough to overcome and avoid risks, and most importantly, disease. The orienting question throughout this would be, why do people get ill? And not, why are people healthy? So to conclude, I hope that the strengths-based approach has provided us with some insight into how we can implement this particular approach within our programs of Queensland HPE. One of the most important points that I want to leave you with is the fact that this is a nuanced and subtle difference. And for those who work in the field, it's about driving a study of health rather than privileging a study for health.